All right, guys, today we are officially starting our unit on cells. So you are either going to be getting this lecture in class or online first, and then we're going to finish it up with the second half of organelles in class. If you are in my 8th hour B day, I want to apologize. You guys can stop right here. I forgot to hand out your packet to you, so I'm going to give you an extra day to catch up on these notes, and we will just start in on them tomorrow in class. So you guys get a free pass. Yay, you. Otherwise, this is the new note packet that I've given you. So we have the unit topic is cells on the top. There are 3 different concepts. And over today and tomorrow, we're going to go through cell theory and organelles. So cells are the basic building block of everything in our world. Everything that is living is made up of cells. If you think of like our tables and stuff, tables are made up of our atoms, which we talked about in physical science, but living things are created full of cells. So when we think of a lion, we can break that down. We'll talk about a hierarchy later on in the year, but they are made of organ systems, which is made of organs, which is made of tissues, which is made of tissue cells. So everything is made up of cells, and there is a lot that goes into them. So we're going to just jump right in. So cell theory, this is the 3 parts of what we know about cells that has to be true. So all living things are made up of cells. That was something that we talked about in our characteristics of life. Everything is made of cells if it is living. And they're the most basic unit of life, but we can't just create cells out of nowhere. Cells come from other cells. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about mitosis. So all of our cells regenerate their own cells to replace them. And all living things are made of cells, but organisms can be either unicellular, which was when we talked about being made of just one cell, because like a unicycle, has one wheel. A unicellular organism has one cell. And then multicellular, that is made of many cells, which then organize themselves into tissues, organs, and organ systems, which then makes an organism, which is us, or that cute little dog right there. So talking about cell theory, part number 2, cells are the most basic unit of life. We have 2 types, this prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. Now, as we go through this, it's going to seem a little complicated, but we'll talk about a couple different ways we can remember it. So we're going to fill in this chart, which says that a eukaryotic cell has a nucleus. Prokaryotic cells do not. Eukaryotes do have a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells also have membrane-bound organelles, which we'll talk about more later. How they divide, eukaryotic cells are mitosis, and prokaryotic are called binary fission. Prokaryotic cells are always unicellular organisms, but eukaryotic can be either unicellular or multicellular. And then this is where it looks a little complicated. So our prokaryotic cells have cell walls, but they're made of peptidoglycan. It's really early in the morning for that word. And I do not expect you to remember that word specifically. However, our cell walls in our eukaryotic is only in fungi and plants, and we do want to remember that they are made of cellulose. You can remember chitin if you want, but cellulose is the more important one because that is when we talk about our plant cells. And our prokaryotic cells are typically our bacteria, where eukaryotic is going to be more of the bigger living items like animals, plants, fungi, and protists. So even though we have 2 different types, our prokaryotic and our eukaryotic, which do have a nucleus, all cells are going to have a cell membrane and cytoplasm. They all have ribosomes and genetic material. A cell doesn't do much if it doesn't have genetic material. So these are something that you are going to write down underneath your big chart block thing. And you are going to need to know what all cells have and what is unique to just each of the cells. So let's talk about organelles. You'll see a number 3 on your notes. That's where you would write down that all cells come from other cells. It goes a little out of order there. So cell organelles, these are like how a person has organs. Organelles are the organs of a cell. So all cells have those 4 structures we talked about, but eukaryotic cells also have membrane-bound organelles, meaning that they're kind of enclosed and we can tell them apart. So organelles are specialized structures within a cell that work together to help make the cell function. So it's like your organs, but in a much, much smaller form. And their entire main purpose, the only thing these organelles want to do is make proteins. #proteins matter. Remember how important proteins were when we talked about our macromolecules? Well, sorry, I had to change up stools. All right, moving on. So our animal cell organelles. This is typically what our animal cell is going to look like. And you actually have a picture of this on page 9 in your notes. But this is the usual image we're going to see when we see animal cells. And then your plant cell organelles. So if you go back and forth between these two, there are differences in them. And we're going to go through all the different things that they have and what their functions are. So at the bottom of all these slides, you're going to see our animal cell, which is the pink one on the left, the plant cell in the middle, and then the bacteria on the right. We're going to talk about the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. And it surrounds the outside of all of our cells, every single one of them. And it's made of 2 layers known as the phospholipid bilayer. There we go. And I will show you what the phospholipid bilayer is in just a second. But notice that it has lipids in it, which is our fats. And its job is to control what goes in and out of the cell. So it's kind of like a fence and bodyguards around our cells. And it is present in all 3 different types of our organelles. So if I were you, I would get out 3 different colored highlighters or 3 different colored pens. And I would make a mark or highlight the words for what each of these organelles is found in, what type of cell. I'm just going to stand up. Okay. There we go. So here's our phospholipid bilayer. Now, if you remember, lipids are our fats. It's how we store everything. So this is just 2 layers of fats. That's how we get the bilayer, like a bicycle has 2 wheels. And then we have proteins that are kind of embedded within it. And what's happening here, so we're going to talk about our phospholipid bilayer, kind of like it's a sponge. And so we've all seen, this is actually 2 sponges put together, but it's the best I've got for right now. You have those sponges that are like yellow and green, and the green's like the scrubby side. So we're going to talk about our phospholipid bilayer. If you look at the 2 layers, they're like a little alien head and then 2 legs sticking down. So the top is what we call hydrophilic, which means that it likes water. Water doesn't really do anything to it. It's okay to like hang out around water, not a big deal. But then the tails or the legs, which are meeting up in the middle, are hydrophobic. And that means that they are afraid of water or they don't want to touch water. So then we have them coming together so that the part that likes water is on the outside and the part that doesn't like water is on the inside. So we're kind of making like a sponge sandwich in there. Next, we have the cytoskeleton. And it's going to be thread-like fibers. So think of this almost like fringe on like a jacket. It's made of proteins. And we don't usually see it in a cell diagram because they are so small and so thin. but their job is to help give the cell its shape. So think about if you were like decorating a cake and you didn't want the frosting to get all smushed on top, you would put in a couple toothpicks and then put your plastic wrap over that so that the plastic wrap didn't touch the cake. It gives it a little bit more shape. So those toothpicks are kind of like your cytoskeleton. And these also can help move organelles around. So you can kind of almost imagine them like shoving things in the right direction as they go, keeping the shape of the cell. And they provide structural support for animal cells, which don't have a cell wall. Next is our cytoplasm. So your structure is a jelly-like substance. It's literally kind of like Jell-O. And it's mostly water, but its job is to hold everything in place. So I don't know if you've ever had the Jell-O that like my grandma used to make it all the time, where there's fruit pieces mixed into it. That is what the cytoplasm is like. And your cytoplasm is going to be present in all three types of your cells. Yeah, no, I'm playing. Okay, couldn't remember. So our nucleus. Nucleus is going to be on page 4 of your notes, and it's going to contain all of your genetic material, which is important, right? Without genetic material, you're not considered a living thing. So that's where all of our DNA is housed. And it's surrounded by a nuclear envelope or nuclear membrane with pores that controls what goes in and out. So it's kind of like your cell membrane, but inside the cell on just the nucleus level. And its job is just to protect the DNA, because the DNA is telling every single cell in your body what it needs to do, what it needs to make, how to repair different cells, how we're going to create more protein, how we're going to grow as people, like what hair color you have. Everything about you is controlled by DNA. So the nucleus' entire job is to make sure that that DNA stays safe. And your nucleus is found in your plant and animal cells, but not in your bacteria. Because remember, our plant and animal cells are eukaryotic cells, so they do have a nucleus. Going to get that in your head at one point. And then our bacteria cells do not. Then we have the nucleolus, and this is kind of just like the center of a jawbreaker in a way, or like the center of a gusher. Say gusher. Gushers are good. So it's inside the nucleus, and its job is to make up rRNA. So it's creating rRNA, which makes ribosomes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And it is found in both of our nucleuses, which are in plant and animal cells, but not in our bacteria cells. Ribosomes are just these little specks that you see throughout all of our cells, and they are made of proteins and that rRNA that was made in our nucleolus. It's in the rough ER and floating throughout our cytoplasm, and its job is to make proteins. If you haven't figured out by now, our cells like making proteins, and our ribosomes are everywhere. So here we have the rough ER, and there's two parts to this. So you'll see on your notes there's different arrows. The rough ER, or the rough endoplasmic reticulum, is the part that looks like it's covered in beads almost. When we were doing edible cells, which we won't be able to do this year, people would use like nerd ropes for these because they're covered in the nerds on the outside. And it has the ribosomes on the surface, and it kind of hugs the nucleus. So you'll see it's pretty much just surrounding the nucleus exactly where it's at, and its job is to make proteins. Weird. When in doubt, if you don't know what something's job is, guessing making proteins is not a bad choice. And they are present around our nucleus, so they're only in our plant and animal cells and not bacteria. Now the smooth ER is the part without the little bumps all over it. And there's just no ribosomes on the surface. It's attached to the outside of the rough ER. So you've got your nucleus, and then the rough ER is the next layer, and then the smooth ER is right outside of that. And its job is to actually make lipids for the membrane. So our phospholipid bilayer around our cell membrane, this is where those lipids come from. And it is, again, around the nucleus, so it's everywhere but bacteria. And we will go ahead and stop there for now. We will do part 2 either in a different video or in class, depending on when I see you next.